Okay, hey, I was remiss on one thing. I want to show you what you have before I bring up Robert Leonhard. Okay, so first thing, made a booklet, all right? In this book, you have the biography of all the speakers. So as I introduce them, I'm not going to go into their individual details, but you have it there. If you look at the next page, it has kind of their overall, what they're talking about, so you have it. I know we goofed up Robert Leonhard's first page. I know. So anybody wants to complain, try putting this on and be flawless. All right. But he's going to give a great pitch. But you also on it, you have a side to take notes. So you can have the speaker, what they're saying, and the notes beside it. So just know that that's what you have. Okay, next. You have here, this is the Core Recon Armorial Sphere of War exercise for Cascade riflers who will participate. All right, you'll take more orders from the tower. When I bring up our chaplain, he'll lead you through that. Okay, one of my officers said, hey, sir, it'd be great if we knew what all of these maneuver warfare authors say on one place. So this is what? Have you ever seen the doc mat from the Command General Staff College? Well, we created the maneuver warfare mat. So put everything you need to know, well, not everything, but the key people on this mat, so you can see what they say, what their argument is, and kind of what they're about. If you flip it over, you will see how we operationalize it. So, surprise, there's our offense, defense, and plays. I had one person point out, like, well, you really want your plays out? Well, we'll see if everyone follows it. But anyway, that's where it comes from, and you'll see the plays there and how you operationalize it. Also, you have a sticker. Commemorate the event. So these are the products that you have in front of you to take advantage of at home and to utilize. Okay, with that, I want to introduce our first speaker, Robert Leonhard. I know he goes by Bob, but I tell you, so here's how, this is why this person's impactful. 2006-17, I read a book called Art of Maneuver. I'm stunned by reading that book. In this book was stuff that I felt my whole military career. Something was wrong with the Army, and I couldn't put my finger on it. He did. I was blown away by what I read. I was like, where does he come up with this? So I looked at his bibliography, and that led me to other key books that's changed my whole outcome of thinking. Race to the Swift, the Marine Corps Tactics Manual, 1993 version, and on and on and on and on. One book completely changed my trajectory. Much of what you see around you is because of that one book. If you don't think your writing, your contribution doesn't make a difference, I'd point you to that. Right? One book completely changed my trajectory of how I think about things and how I'm convinced about it. So later on, he wrote Fighting by Minutes. Brilliant book. He takes it, how fighting by time, how you operationalize that to win. And then his last book was The Principles of War in the Information Age. So much of what I think about and much how I kind of crafted how I fight is really, its genesis was what Robert Leonhard has done. So with that utmost honor and thanks, I want to introduce our first speaker, Robert Leonhard.
Thank you, Colonel Broyles, generals, friends, and colleagues. It's a real honor to be here. It's fun to reconnect with some very old Army friends and to have a chance to speak with you today. What I wanted to do today was share with you some thoughts on maneuver warfare, but kind of as a leadership philosophy, as opposed to some of the technical details that we often talk about. So do we have my stuff up yet? Okay. So this is what I wanted to speak with you about. Again, I'm going to approach the subject from a philosophical standpoint. I want to talk to you a little bit about the competing perspectives that you will see on maneuver warfare that are out there today in the literature and in among professionals. Talk to you a little bit about the way I balance these ideas in my own mind as a commander, as a planner, now as an analyst, as a student of history. And then finally, I want to just conclude with some thoughts on this business of envisioning unreadiness in the enemy. First I want to just ask the most basic question. Why do we even talk about maneuver warfare? Why is it a thing? Why is it a subject that people agree or disagree about? And I think the answer to that, the most fundamental answer to that, is this idea of economy in war. In my book that Colonel Broyles mentioned, Principles of War, I took the old principle of economy of force, and I sort of elevated it into a law of war. I think in my mind, it is one of the three really laws of war that are immutable. You know, they're just always there. They always affect our art. And the law of economy I would describe this way. It says this: man's ambitions are limitless. I mean, we want to do everything, including on the battlefield. There are many, many things we want to do, but our resources are extremely limited. We have very little time. We have few soldiers. We have few supplies. We have a little bit of political will that we can work with. But these resources run out, and they run out quickly. And so how do we balance limitless ambitions and very limited resources? And the answer is we economize. We must economize. Warfare itself is an extremely wasteful enterprise because lives are on the line. We're trying to win at all costs. And so it tends to be a very tough business to economize in, but that's what we have to do. We seek to economize through maneuver warfare, by dislocating the enemy, by putting the enemy at a disadvantage. We economize. We can beat them at less cost in blood and in treasure. That's the idea. Now, again, philosophically for me, I define maneuver warfare probably different than most people do. You will find a lot of technical definitions for maneuver warfare. This always reminds me of when I first wrote Art of Maneuver, way long time ago. I decided that I was going to send it to Bill Lind, the author of his own maneuver warfare work, the Maneuver Warfare Handbook. And so I sent it to him, hoping that he would send it back with all sorts of congratulations and so forth, and that he would agree with my perspectives on maneuver warfare. Instead, when I opened up the envelope, the first thing I saw was like a big X, big red X. No, this isn't right. And I quickly found out that Bill Lind defined maneuver warfare differently than I did, okay? And probably that's true all across the board. I look at maneuver warfare as a philosophy, and it's a philosophy of advantage. It doesn't matter what the MET-T conditions are, doesn't matter what the terrain is, what type of war it is, if it's urban or not urban or whatever, whether it's an insurgency or a conventional war, it is the search for advantage. I'm trying to find advantage. I want to fight with the advantage on my side, okay, is the idea there. Why do we do that? Because we have to economize, okay? Now I use here a little proverb that I made up that sounds a little bit strange, but my proverb is this: be very strong and think like a weak man. That's the way you do maneuver warfare. Be very strong. Why do we have to be strong? We have to be strong because the enemy is not going to lay down. The enemy wants to win just as much as we do, and we may be in one hell of an attrition fight in a future battle. Sometimes it's unavoidable. So we got to be stronger than the enemy, tougher than the enemy. We have to be more skilled than the enemy, so we can win if we're forced into a symmetrical fight. But at the same time, while we're strong, we want to think like a weak man. And here's what I mean by that. Imagine a scenario. You're a kid at the bus stop going to school, and the bully walks up and pushes you around and takes your lunch money, and you're humiliated. And then he does it again the next day, and he does it again the next day. And you live your life getting beat up at the bus stop because you're too weak to fight this guy, and he takes your lunch money every day, and it's just humiliating. Now, when you think of these two individuals, the strong bully and the weak guy who keeps getting beat up, which one of those two wants to change the scenario? You know, the bully is very happy to keep this up day after day. He has absolutely no motivation to be creative and come up with something different. But the weak guy is desperately creative, desperately creative. He does not want to keep suffering this same fate. He has to somehow compensate for his weakness, and he does it by thinking up a new scenario. I'm going to go to a different bus stop. I'm going to get another ride to school. I'm going to hide my lunch money so he can't find it. I'm going to do something, but I'm going to change this scenario. I am going to be desperately creative because my weakness forces me to be that way. And so my advice to folks that want to do maneuver warfare is be strong. This is a business where you've got to be strong, but think like a weak man. Be creative, okay, is the idea there. Now, if you do a lot of reading in this area, you're going to find conflict over this subject of maneuver warfare. You're going to find authors, scholars, practitioners who would tell you that they don't believe in this maneuver warfare stuff, that it's myth-based, that it's not true, it doesn't work, it's a misrepresentation of history, and so forth. On the other side, you will find authors who are proponents and champions for the idea of maneuver warfare, outmaneuvering the enemy. So what do you do with these two perspectives? My advice to you is not to choose one side or the other, but to balance them, because there is wisdom on both sides. You should certainly be in the habit of reading books with which you disagree. That's a very good way to build critical thinking in your mind. And so I like to read books that don't agree with maneuver warfare. One of these, Amos Fox's book there, Amos Fox is a friend of mine, and we go round and round about this. This is a good exercise to test what we really believe. So I would say read all these sources and then integrate them, balance them, because there is wisdom on both sides. I want to talk to you about the voices that I hear in my head, okay? Because I hear two voices in my head. As a commander, as a planner, as an analyst, as a student of history, I hear voices, two of them. One voice is the voice of pragmatism. That comes from years of being an infantryman, years of studying history, years of training in the military. And that's the side of me that says we got to be very realistic concerning the enemy. We don't ever want to wish the enemy away. We don't ever want to pretend that we can go out and do some little dance on the battlefield and the enemy's going to just fold. Okay, that's not going to happen. We don't want to underestimate the enemy. We want to understand that that enemy is tough, skilled, ready to fight, wants to win, and we have to deal with him on that basis. The enemy is strong. We want to think about the worst case that could happen, and the voice of pragmatism often thinks about the worst case. The enemy may outflank us. We may attempt a maneuver on the battlefield and fail. The enemy's artillery may suppress our artillery. Lots of things that can happen. And so the pragmatic part of me is trying to think ahead and develop branches and sequels to those kinds of disasters that could happen on the battlefield. The pragmatic part of me says, I may be unable to outmaneuver the enemy, and therefore I may have to fight in a symmetrical fight, in an attrition match that is all about firepower. If that is the case, I intend to win that fight. I'm going to train and prepare to win that fight. On the other hand, there's another voice in my head, and that's the voice of the artist, the poet, the creative side. And that voice says, yes, all that pragmatic stuff is true, But it is a fact, military history tells us, that armies sometimes get outflanked, outmaneuvered, surprised, demoralized, logistically strained. Armies sometimes rout and retreat and surrender. Now, I'm willing to wager that you've never seen that happen at the National Training Center. The OPFOR does not often retreat, surrender, or rout. But in real war, in real military history, that happens. And you can't ignore that. That is a phenomenon in our profession. And that's what we're about with maneuver warfare. We're trying to bring that about on the battlefield. So we study it, we practice it, we train it, we teach ourselves about it. And we do everything we can do to bring that about on the battlefield. Outflank, surprise, preempt the enemy. We also think not just about the worst case that could happen, but we think about the best case that can happen. And I wonder how many times in your own training have you thought about the best case as you were planning? Very often the United States Army is not good at that. Very often the United States Army misses opportunities for a failure to think about the best case. One of the missions that we're not particularly good at, if we're honest with ourselves in the Army, is the mission of pursuit and exploitation. Historically, we suck at that. And one of the reasons is because we train ourselves so much to think about the worst case that we fail to anticipate that moment when the enemy quits the battlefield. And so that when the enemy does start to retreat, it takes us a while to get ourselves ready to actually go and pursue and exploit this advantage. We got to think about that best case and plan for that, just like we plan for the worst case. So these are the two voices that I hear in my head. The wisdom of creativity deals with this idea of thinking about the enemy's unreadiness and learning to envision the enemy's unreadiness. Now, we already talked about the fact that we're pragmatic and we don't want to wish the enemy away, and that there's truth there, there's wisdom there. But the other side of that is that the enemy is also most often unready to fight at any particular moment, just like we are unready to fight at any particular moment, just like you are unready to fight right now because you're sitting in a symposium, okay? There's lots of things that we do on the battlefield that make us unready to fight at any particular moment. And so one of the things that maneuver warfare does is it thinks about that phenomenon and tries to exploit it. Very often what I'll do is when I'm talking to a group, I'll ask them to think about an enemy tank. Just picture an enemy tank in your mind, all right? Everybody do that for a minute. You're thinking about an enemy tank. Now, I want you to look at that picture that's in your mind. Examine it for a moment. And I want to ask you this question. What side of the tank are you looking at in your mind? Is the tank facing you? Is the tank facing away from you? You're looking at the grill doors? Are you looking at the side of the tank? Well, of course, that enemy tank wants you to be looking at the front of the tank because that's where his best armor is. And he wants his gun pointed at you, okay? Is the gun in your mind pointed your way? What kind of terrain is that tank in? Is he in nice rolling terrain? Maybe he's hauled down in a fighting position. How many of you have thought about that tank looking at the rear of the tank or the top of the tank? Or here's a weird one, the bottom of the tank. Or how many of you thought about that tank moving through really bad tank terrain, like a jungle trail or an tight urban environment? Or how many of you thought about that tank sitting on a transport ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean making its way across the ocean. It's unready to fight in that condition. Or it's in a motor pool with the engine out or the tracks off. It's unready to fight. There are a lot of times in the life of that tank when it is not ready to fight, and very few times when it is ready to fight. When you looked at that enemy tank, did you assume it had a crew in it? Of course, most of the time it does not have a crew in it. Did you assume it was uploaded with fuel and ammunition? You know, those are the kinds of assumptions that we tend to make. We think of the enemy as being ready. But what we have to teach ourselves to do is imagine what it looks like when he's unready, okay? And then try to exploit that. Find that time when he's unready and fight him then. I'm going to try to show a clip, a movie clip. I don't know if it's going to work or not. Have we decided whether it's going to work? Okay, we're going to try it. So this is a clip from the movie The Crossing, starring Jeff Daniels. And I love this clip because it really shows the idea of exploiting the enemy's unreadiness. If we can show this, and if the sound goes on, is good, what you're going to see is you're going to see a conference table, and they're having a conference about this upcoming attack on Trenton. And what you're going to see is Jeff Daniels playing George Washington. He's going to stand up and propose his plan, his concept of operation. And across the table from him is the very pragmatic General Gates, Horatio Gates, wearing the white wig, and he hates this plan. And they argue about it. And I want you to listen to the wisdom of General Gates, because a lot of what he says is true. And a lot of what he says makes a lot of sense. As you may know, Battle of Trenton, we actually did win that fight. Let me try to, can you advance that slide? Oh, there we go. We won that fight with hardly any casualties at all. It was a remarkable example of surprise in war and took advantage of the unreadiness that Washington anticipated, given that this was, right at the time of Christmas and there would be, drinking and so forth. So this was an example of this idea of envisioning unreadiness, not wishing the enemy away, but understanding the phenomenon of perpetual unreadiness and being able to leverage it and exploit it in a concept of operation. That's just, one example of something that I think is pretty fundamental to maneuver warfare. So I'm going to conclude, and this is really what I want to leave with you, that there are, differing perspectives on maneuver warfare. I invite you to integrate them. Look at all of those and integrate that in your own mind as you develop your own leadership philosophy. Think about this idea of gaining advantage over the enemy, trying never to acquiesce in a fair fight. We hate fair fighting. We may have to do it, and if we are going to do it, we are going to win that fight, but we don't like to fight that way if we can. We want to fight unfair. And that is maneuver warfare. That's the philosophy. All right. I'm going to stop there. We can either, I don't know if you wanted them to, discuss or ask questions or whatever, but I'm going to leave it right there.
Yeah.
All right.
We have opportunity to ask questions. So please, we have a microphone system. Ask you to use it. So therefore, it gets captured up on. So I can offer you to have questions, discussion points. Here's our time.
Sir, Colonel Flower, 2146. So you talked about, we don't usually think about the best case. So in your experience, how would the first Gulf War have gone differently if we were more accustomed to pursuing an exploitation?
Yeah, I'm sorry, how would what have gone?
The first Gulf War.
Gulf War, yeah. Because when I was in the Gulf War, I was in an infantry unit, Bradley outfit. And, the idea that we were going to execute a pursuit against basically a beaten enemy was really almost a scary idea, because I think that in the minds of the general officers especially that were fighting that war, they had that Vietnam syndrome hanging over them, the failures in Vietnam, and they wanted to get this one right and make sure that we didn't have the horrendous losses that some thought we would have. I remember I actually went over there, in '91 as the third major in an infantry battalion, the third major. And the reason I was the third major was because they were anticipating losses among, the field grades and company grade officers and, and so forth. They were anticipating that we were going to have terrible casualties, perhaps from chemical weapons or whatever. And in the event, we hardly suffered at all. Let me give you an example of how failure to understand the real nature of that enemy led to a problem and how it might have gone different. And this is just kind of a strange story that happened in my own career as an infantry officer. At the time the war broke out, I was at Fort Benning as a combat developer. I had no idea what combat developments even was when I got assigned there. It sounded cool, combat, cool. Yeah, not so cool. Combat development, I didn't particularly like the job, but it was all about building the force of the future, all right? I eventually learned to like that kind of thing. Well, as we were building the force of the future, one of the ways we did it was we would do computerized war games and fight out little battles, on the computers back then, and then analyze the results. And I always had a problem with these games that they would fight. And I wrote about this in Art of Maneuver, because it was just these relentless attrition fights all the time, on these computers. The enemy never broke. The enemy was never outflanked. The enemy had no discernible weakness or vulnerability of any kind. It was just these two huge blue force, red force getting together on a computer screen, and they would literally, like this motorized rifle regiment would come in, and we would start shooting and, picking them off with artillery and aviation and tow weapons and tanks, and we were killing hundreds of vehicles, and they're still moving forward until we kill the last vehicle, which is still moving forward when it dies. I mean, that's the kind of stuff we were doing back then, right? And I told them at the time, this is stupid. This is not the way the enemy fights. It's not the way we fight. It's not realistic. There's no moral factors here. It's not going to work. Well, they told me to go to hell. So what happens is this: because we were doing those kind of fights in the war games, we did the analysis and realized, my God, we need tons of Class 5 tank rounds, tow rounds. We need tons of artillery rounds, because we're going to kill all this stuff and we're going to run out of ammunition. Then I go to the Gulf War, and in our combat trains in our battalion, we have, no surprise, tons of ammunition. we had ammunition that we never touched the entire war, dragged it all around the desert, and never broke into that ammunition, ever. But you know what we ran out of? Fuel. We ran out of fuel chasing a beaten enemy. That never happened in those computerized games, so we never did the calculation of how many hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel we would need all the time. So I guess that would be my long-winded answer to you, is that if we simulated better, if we thought more creatively, if we read more military history rather than playing computerized war games that weren't realistic, we might have had a more balanced logistical preparation, and we could have done our pursuit a little bit better than we did, okay? So that would be my answer.
Morning, sir. Lieutenant Huey, 161 Scout Platoon Leader. Question for you. How do you reconcile being prepared to fight an unprepared enemy while also not underestimating them?
Yeah, I mean, this is the hard thing, because I just told you today, don't ever wish the enemy away. Oh, and by the way, you got to be able to envision an unready enemy. Okay, is the guy losing his mind? These are both true. These are both true. The way you balance it, I mean, you know, it's hard for us. We're not trained this way to think that about an enemy being unready. When you go to the National Training Center, the OPFOR is never unready. You know, it would be rare to surprise them in any meaningful way. And they're certainly never going to retreat or give up. I mean, that's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen in the computerized games we play. What do they even call it? They used to call it BCTP. I don't know, do they still call it that, Jim? MC? Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, so the same idea there. I imagine that, you know, at least it was this way when I was a planner, you know, that OPFOR never does anything other than, you know, win and keep moving forward. So it's hard for us to imagine an enemy that is trying to get away or an enemy that has a moral weakness or whatever. But that's why we read history. That's part of your professional development, is to read history, you know, and from history you'll see that in fact this idea of perpetual unreadiness is reality. The other thing is, it's much easier to imagine ourselves as being unready. You know, you kind of worry about that. You know, when you go out on a defensive position, right, you're going to go set up a defensive position. What is the first priority of work in setting up a defensive position? I hope they're still teaching this at Fort Benning, or Fort, whatever it's called now. I forget what it's called. Anyway, what used to be Fort Benning. What's the first thing you do on a defense? Very first priority work. I'm shocked. Say again? Enemy, okay, yeah, I mean, you gotta analyze that. What else? Security. Somebody said security. That's the first priority work. Now stop and think for a second. Why is security the first priority work? The answer is because you instinctively know that you are unready for combat, perpetually unready for combat. And you're going to be doing a whole bunch of work on this defensive position that's going to make you unready for combat at any given moment. So you send out the security. In the event that the enemy comes, the security will alert you and give you the time to come to full battle readiness. Okay, so that's just instinctively part of our doctrine, and it is a reality. And so what we got to do is learn to envision it in the enemy ranks as well as in our ranks. That's probably not a good answer to your question. You are correct in that these are conflicting ideas. Don't wish the enemy away, but be able to see him in an unready condition. They're both true. Got to do both of them. Other thoughts?
Lieutenant Adams, 161 Military Intelligence. What sort of indicators should we be looking for in order to identify an unprepared enemy so that we can take most advantage of it?
Yeah, so it's a great question. You know, what do you look for? I mean, to me, one of the things that we want to look for is, you know, where the location of the enemy, where he is and where he intends to go. Where does he want to be? You know, we often, you know, sort of train ourselves to think about set piece sort of battles in our training environments. You know, we're gonna fight the enemy here, we're gonna fight him there, and it's typically favorable terrain for the enemy. I think I told the story in our maneuver where I saw a bunch of planners you know, when I was at Fort Benning, and they were going to take on an enemy motorized rifle division. Okay, and so they had this gigantic map, and you know, here comes this back then Soviet motorized rifle division, and it's coming across this way, and it crosses a river, and then it comes into this kind of nice mixed terrain, and then it's going to cross another river and then go off the map. So where do these guys decide they're going to fight this guy? They fight him right smack in the middle between these two rivers. Now, if you were the enemy commander, where are you hoping not to fight, okay, is when you're halfway across that river or halfway across that river. Those are the places you don't want to fight. You take extreme measures to make sure that you don't fight there, okay? the guys that were planning this just acquiesced into that. You know, it was almost like as a gentleman's agreement. They went out and shook hands with the enemy and said, "Where would you like to fight? Where's your best terrain?" Well, right there in the middle. Okay, that's where we will attack you. Okay, so I guess my first answer to that is look at where the enemy is moving. Look at the life cycle of the enemy, and if possible, interrupt that life cycle in the worst possible place for the enemy. So I mean, other than that, the other thing that I think that we sometimes fail to do in terms of intelligence prep, or maybe this is just my impression, I don't know, but I think sometimes we fall short in doing the intelligence preparation with regard to technology and the technology difference, you know, asymmetry between us and an enemy. I wonder, as an S2, you know, when we're given the the estimate, the enemy estimate, do we talk about asymmetry in technology? In other words, like, do we understand, you know, here's an enemy tank, here's a friendly tank. What is the optimum range that these two want to fight at? And it may be that this guy wants to fight at 1,500 meters and this guy wants to fight at 2,500 meters, you know? So where's the advantageous fight there? You know, we want to make sure we understand that. You know, the intelligence officers, the S2s, they're often given this, you know, these enemy estimates, and sort of they're a little bit apprehensive that they don't want to screw this up when they're given the enemy estimate. They want to make sure that they, you know, present the enemy and talk about all the enemy's strengths so that, you know, so that we don't get surprised. But do you talk about the enemy's vulnerabilities? Where can I kick him in the groin? You know, where can I, what aspects can I attack that will put him at a severe disadvantage, if they exist, you know, and they don't always exist, but we want to look for them. So I guess that'd be, again, my long-winded answer there. So, so I'm probably about out of time, I would imagine. Okay, one more if there's, yes, please.
Sir, Major Haydock from Joint Force Headquarters. Sir, I have a question for you about preemption. Also, I'm a fan of Fighting by Minutes and Art of Maneuver.
Thank you.
Fighting by Minutes is still a part of the courseware at SAMS for your edification, sir.
That's good. The thing is, I don't care if you read it, but you should certainly own it if you're a professional. That is the mark of a professional, owning it.
I do have a copy, sir. And
Okay,
I think,
good.
yeah.
You are a professional.
Sir, on spoiling attacks, I'm curious about your thoughts on different techniques or forms of spoiling attacks. What comes to my mind, sir, on preemption, right, is the spoiling attack, occupying the best terrain ahead of your enemy, or if you're inside of an urban area, trying to turn the populace against the enemy through some sort of information operation. So, sir, what are some techniques and forms or ideas you have on preemption, sir?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm delighted to hear someone talk about, spoiling attacks, because I don't even think that term is in our doctrine anymore. I know Jim would probably know, but I mean, do we? Yeah, okay. So, I mean, it's certainly part of history, but I remember being a planner at Fort Leavenworth at one point, and I was talking, and they had the graybeards there, some of the old retired generals, and I was talking about a spoiling attack, and he reprimanded me and said that term is not in our doctrine, so we don't even use that. So, all right, but anyway, yeah. So I think that, like, in terms of preemption, so the difficulty in all of this, not just in preemption, but in all these maneuver warfare concepts, one of the things that we don't talk about sometimes is the fact that we're not just free agents out there on the battlefield, at battalion level or brigade level or even division level. We have a mission from higher, and our maneuver is integrated with, people on either flank, right? So if I want to be, George Patton out there and I want to go and do these big, great envelopments and all that, but my higher headquarters is not doing anything like that, then that's probably not going to work. So I got to be, so anything I'm doing, including preemption, has got to be integrated into obviously the higher plan, or it's not going to be, it's not going to be effective or supported. Yeah, but I do love this idea of preemption. I love, the idea of, if the enemy is getting ready to attack us, that we do a spoiling attack. For those that may not know, the idea of a spoiling attack is the enemy is staging his logistics and his artillery forward to prepare to attack us, and instead we attack them first to push that stuff back and to disrupt his logistical, preparation and that sort of thing. It's a splendid way to illustrate preemption in a defensive operation. So again, I applaud you for bringing that up. But yeah, the other things that you were talking about there, turning the enemy or turning the urban population against the enemy, that sort of thing. This is all part of maneuver warfare in my mind, because again, it's creating advantage. I think we're going to be talking a little bit later on about narrative in war and the idea of information in war. That is a tremendous tool to be talking about at a maneuver warfare symposium, because that's a big part of the fight now. Again, I'm probably not answering the question as you intended it, but I do love that you're thinking about preemption. And again, I think it's a real key part of maneuver warfare that we should be thinking about and force ourselves to think about, even if the higher headquarters may not be thinking in those terms, but we got to be always pushing for ideas like that so that we can get that enemy when he's off balance instead of when he's ready to fight. So please, yes, sir.